The latest Hogwarts Legacy official launch trailer further cements my opinion that this game will get ongoing content of some kind. I want to weigh the pros and the cons of the DLC expansion approach versus the sequel approach. I've already kind of just gone over and over the live service debate. That's a video you can go watch where myself and 30 Instill Gaming sort of debated the live chat about live service. I don't want to do that in this video. I want to, number one, I want to let the video kind of just play so you can see it, because I think there's so much new gameplay footage in here that is really pushing some of my argumentation, okay? So I believe there are two pathways for Hogwarts Legacy that would not be live service. Number one is the DLC expansion model, and the other would be the sequel model. There are pros and cons to both sides. Now, before I even get into the pros and the cons of both sides, I do want to readily admit that the game already has a massive amount of content and replayability. 30 to 40 hours just for the main campaign, and then 70 to 100 hours if you're going to run completionist, and that's just one house. Like, you can't switch houses mid-game or get to the end and hop to another house. You'd have to start a whole new character. You also cannot change your wand, so a single playthrough, you are committed to your wand and your house, which adds great replay value, and you will have 4 character slots, which makes sense because there's 4 houses. Now, the wand is one of the equipable 7 items that you have in your inventory, and it may even have different stats and perks that would be inherent to the wood and the core of the wand, making it a really great replay value of having a very different experience next time. I imagine the wand has marginal effects on gameplay, but as you can see in the footage behind me, it is very clear there is a huge focus on story, on characters, on very epic moments, and I can't see this game being a one and done. I really think there will be some ongoing content model, so let's walk through the two that many people are pulling for because they don't like my position on live service. Let's just first weigh the pros and cons of DLC expansion style, which would mean you'd wait lengthy amounts of time before they added something very story-focused, new areas, new things to go get, but it wouldn't be something that would happen very quickly. It would likely be like a 12-month waiting period before it would even be available to be, sold and installed. So, what are the pros of a DLC and expansion style? First and foremost, I think the launch state of the game seems so dense and so broad that they could really take their time and make it amazing. They wouldn't have to rush. It wouldn't be like something that would come out and be not very substantive or full of bugs. So I actually think this model, that is one of the pros of waiting. You could make it very substantive. For a game that has so much breadth, depth, and size, you would want the expansions in the DLC to fit into that mold and that identity. It wouldn't make much sense to pour hundreds of hours into the game and then have an expansion that lasts for like 3 hours. That wouldn't be a very good look. That would feel more like live service. You just took a really long time to deliver it. And the odds are, if they went for a DLC expansion style, the content would be more substantive. Players who dump hundreds of hours into the game will love the ability to continue their character's journey. You wouldn't just sort of walk away. You'd dive back in and have new experiences and continue to enjoy the world of Hogwarts Legacy and Harry Potter. Those who played the game and walked away, maybe you didn't play for hundreds of hours. Maybe you did one playthrough, landed in the 30 to 40 hour range, and that was satisfying for you, and you walked away. Well, that's a great reason to come back. It's a tack-on story. It's a new thing for you to go do, and you took a big break from the game. You come back, your character's ready to go and waiting for you. I think that's a really great way to do it. So that's a lot of, I think, some of the pros, some of the good reasons to do DLC expansion model. Now, there are some cons, I think, to a DLC and expansion model. Number one is it might feel like the game is just too dense and long to really add on to it. And maybe you would say, I'd rather get a fully fledged year 6 sequel. Like, you start year 5, you come back in year 6 and get a fully fledged sequel. Many people might look at a DLC expansion and say, listen, why didn't you just do a whole nother game instead of this tack on a year or a year and a half later? Also, you have to consider consider that the time waiting for the DLC and the expansion may cause many people to say, why bother? It's been so long, I don't really feel like diving back in. If we have to wait this long, just give us a sequel. I think that would be some of the negative attitude toward a DLC or expansion style. Some people might even say, listen, just let it be one and done. I get told this all the time. Why can't games just be one and done? I'll address that at the end of this video. I don't think that attitude has traction anymore, given the size and scope of these games and their budgets. Lastly, one of the negative sides of a DLC or expansion model is a game this full and lengthy may have many people feeling like added-on content is just a cheap cash grab rather than a substantive add. I think they would, at some level, be competing with their own content, and here's what I mean. If you dump 50 to 100 hours into this game and then they sell an expansion or a DLC for $30 or $40, you would probably imagine you're going to get, 15 or 20 more hours. I think that's a pretty significant challenge. Anytime you're adding content to a game, you are having that expedited process because the assets and the animations in the world are already built. But still, I think it would be difficult to have such a substantive game sort of towering over your DLC or your expansion, making it seem almost daunting to create the content because many people would say it wasn't worth the money. I spent, $30 or $40. That's half the price of the game. And I didn't get half of the content that I got in the launch version of Hogwarts. Now, I don't think that's a fair expectation, but it's certainly something that people would say looking at the DLC and the expansion model. Let's talk about sequel. Many people, I think, would be far more happier to see a sequel version come out instead of DLC expansion or live service. It would enable them to create a trilogy. This is year 5, you do year 6, and then you do year 7. 3 games in total. Some of the pros to doing a sequel model is the trailer. If you really watch this thing, it makes it very clear that the game will heavily focus on gripping story and big moments with lots of characters. A fully fledged sequel would allow them to do more of this. I think that would be a very good approach to the Hogwarts Legacy franchise. If you're really going to have that sense and scope of longevity with your student, it would make more sense to actually go into a new year and have totally new setups and new things and new places to go. Having a year 6 game and then a year 7 game would make for a very complete package. It would make for a very robust and long-standing trilogy, and that's a great piece of property to do it with. Harry Potter is very well loved globally. The longer they take to build another game, the bigger and more substantive it could be. Departing from a live service model or a DLC or expansion model would enable them to make a significantly bigger and more substantive, deeper game. It would rival the Hogwarts Legacy game year 5. You would want to have a game of equal size, kind of like how we said about DLC. The size and scope of this game would be towering over the DLC. Well, it would be towering over the sequel, and this would enable them to really spend the time to make sure it is big. Extending the player experience with their character into a whole new story and a whole new game experience, I think would feel great. It would sort of feel that way that you get that feeling when you play a game and you port your character over and everything kind of comes with you. It will give you that sense of longevity and that sense of loyalty. Now, there are some cons to the sequel format. There are some negatives. Number 1, it would take a really long time to get the year 6 and the year 7 games, and many might feel like that's just very long in the tooth by the time that happens. Are you really going to want to jump into Hogwarts Legacy year 6 4 or 5 years from now? Now, somebody might say, well, they could expedite the development and just reuse the Hogwarts school. However, I think that could be a problem. As far as development goes, the central piece being the Hogwarts school and location might have many people claiming this is just a recycled game. It's the same place, it's the same location. That might really sour people's opinion of a sequel, which means you might have to go to some of the other wizarding schools, okay? If it drives them to do that, that could maybe lower the commercial success and the demand of any of the subsequent sequels, because if you really think about it, the nostalgic space and the draw to Hogwarts is the school. It's the place that everybody's very familiar with. I don't know if that would work against it, but it's definitely a negative. If you don't use the school. It's going to take way longer to develop, and you're going to have to take people into new journeys and new areas that are just as compelling, just as deep, just as thoughtful, and as substantive as Hogwarts Legacy was. That poses a significant challenge, I think, to any sequel format that they decide to do. So, my conclusion, I'll show the video a couple more times here at the end. My conclusion is that it is clear that this game continues to emerge as a far bigger and deeper game than many people initially thought. Some of my early predictions was that when this game comes out, the headlines will read, Hogwarts Legacy, surprisingly deep RPG experience. It was just a gut instinct that I had. I looked at some of the customization, I looked at some of the clips from the Room of Requirement, and I thought, this game is far bigger than I think a lot of people think. I don't think this is going to be some throwaway action-adventure game. They clearly put a lot of work into the size of the school, the rooms, the art style, the art direction. They put a lot of love and passion into this game, and I think it just continues to reveal itself to be a very substantive and deep game. Now, this drives me to restate over and over that a game of this size warrants continued support and an ongoing content model of some type. People always push back on this notion and say it's a cash grab, it's a terrible way to treat a game. I absolutely 100% disagree with that. I think that model of the past is one of the reasons we got rushed games, crunch culture, and games coming out well before they were ready, because it's so expensive to push out a game, it's so difficult to recoup the cost, the bandwidth required, even the licensing of this game is probably leading to a huge royalty share, which makes it difficult for it to be as profitable. Now, I don't think this game will struggle, but I definitely think the level of development, the size, and the scope of a game like this, I think it deserves more than just a one-and-done experience, especially for all the devs that poured so much time into the game. I think Assassin's Creed Valhalla is going to continue to influence the industry. You make these huge, massive games with worlds and rooms and intricacies and places to visit and go, and then that's it. That's the end. You're not allowed to add on to it. That's a cash grab. You're not allowed to do, live service. That's a cash grab. You can't do DLCs. Like, that is extremely demanding of the developers to make games of this size, this scope, this substance, and say, listen, it needs to be one and done, or you're just being scummy. You're just doing a cash grab. I think that's a terrible mindset going forward in the gaming industry. Games are getting larger, the budgets are getting bigger, the scopes are expanding every single time. You have celebrity voice actors, you have so much work being put into these games. It just stands to reason for an ongoing content model to work. And the reason that you can be okay with it in a game like Hogwarts Legacy is you can buy the game at full price, and as far as we can tell, for all intents and purposes, you can play the ever-loving snot out of this game. Just one playthrough can lead to hundreds of hours. That's not even considering the fact that you could do 4 different playthroughs, 4 different characters, each of the different houses. You could do a playthrough with no dark arts, a playthrough with tons of dark arts, and that, I think, is a huge, huge feather in the cap of the game. So if they decide to add on to it later, they decide to do live service, they decide to do expansions or DLC, you could ignore all of that and still conclude that you got your money's worth. You could just say, I don't need to do any of that stuff. I have a great concrete vanilla experience game right here. The out-of-the-box game was so substantive and so full, I don't need any of that extra content. That's one of the reasons why I think this game is ripe for some type of ongoing content model, because nobody could accuse them of not giving you enough in the base game. You would look foolish. Just on paper right now, nobody could claim that DLC expansions or seasons are a cheap cash grab and they ripped content out of the game. The game right now, as far as we can tell, is going to be absolutely massive with insane replay value, so much customization, so much of you putting yourself into the world. I don't think any of the fears are justified that if this game does some type of an ongoing content model, that it's going to be a cheapening of the game, or it's going to lower the substance or water it down. Final thought. Regardless of the content plans, Hogwarts Legacy continues to look like a very ambitious and promising title. Even if there's never another piece of content added or sold to the franchise, I think we're in for a really big treat when Hogwarts Legacy finally gets here.